Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for month-end closing best practices for Dynamics GP. My name is John Smith. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Director of Enterprise Business Solutions here at CR Group. I have been working with GP since 2000, so wow, it doesn't seem that long. Version 6, and here we are in 2017. So very pleased to spend a bit of time with you this morning and share some anecdotes and some best practices that certainly I've learned along the way, working with all these clients that we deal with, and some things I've seen, and I hope this provides some value to you. Just overall, some housekeeping items before we get started. This webinar is being recorded, and it will become available in the next few days on the Controller's Corner webpage. I will be showing a number of different things in GP during the presentation today. I anticipate, because we only have 30 minutes, that I'll probably go through those quickly, and some of you may want to slow that down and see them again. So be sure to check back on that webpage, and you can certainly do that. During the presentation, please feel free to submit any questions you have using the GoToWebinar question panel. And again, I will do my best to get to those at the end of the presentation. This presentation today earns you a half professional credit for continuing professional development hours. For those of you where it applies, you will get an email later this week with your certificate. In terms of agenda today, what I'd like to do is talk about some common challenges, the typical month-end steps that we see, a little bit here about the importance of reconciliation, and then I think the bulk of this is how to automate this process with the features that are in GP, and we'll do, as I said, a brief demonstration and then take any questions. So let's kick this off and get started. Some of the common challenges we see out there with month-end. Meeting month-end close deadlines is tough. We've got aggressive deadlines, and we just never seem to be able to meet them. We're too busy processing transactions to get accurate numbers. Hear this one all the time. There's lots of business reasons why, but it just seems to be we're caught up processing and just don't have the time to run through the process. We rely on other people, and they don't get their part done on time. For whatever reasons, we're always waiting on others, and it's holding up our month end. Reconciliations don't tie out, and we don't have time to investigate them and fix them, so they just carry over month. We don't have time to analyze data. We're just too busy doing other things. It's just work just to mechanically close the month and get the reports out, and there's no time for analysis. And report creation takes a long time, and we're still using predominantly Excel to do a lot of it. So surprisingly, with Dynamics GP, and it's a version 15 product or 16 product now, and it has tremendous functionality. But we still see this sort of thing all over the place with clients, and that's one of the things that led us to preparing today's webinar. Typically, when we think about month-end, I like to think about 3 steps. And of course, everybody has their own, and these are big buckets. But let's say we close the month, we reconcile, and we analyze and report. And step 1 is probably, well, you can see by the bullet points, the one that has the most activity in it. We've got to get all the transactions entered in the system. And before the period closes, we need to post all of those transactions, whether it's sales order, production orders, time sheets, employee expenses, AP batches, purchase order receipts. The list goes on and on and on. And that needs to be done before we close the month. We've got to get all those transactions in. We're going to go ahead and say after that's done, we've got to post all those outstanding batches. And then in GP, there's some month-end routines that some of you may be running, and that also needs to be done. Once that part is done, we encourage everybody to close the fiscal period calendar in GP. Now, for some of you, depending on the size of your organization, you may be closing the fiscal calendars sort of module by module as you go through this process. Once that step's done, and I think, everybody generally gets to this step, Step 2 is the part that we see a lot of times as sort of hit and miss, and it's how deep you go with the reconciliation on balance sheet items. And, at a high level, I call a hard month-end close one where we post everything through and then we do the detailed balance sheet reconciliation. A soft close, which many of our clients do on a month-by-month basis, means, they do step 1 and then, move on to the next month. If we've gone through the reconciliation, then of course step 3 is we report and we analyze. And here we encourage everybody to use the management reporter report capability in Dynamics GP. It has just great functionality for automating reports, scheduling them, and getting them out to end users. The report and analysis phase may involve an actual versus budget analysis, and it may involve a deeper analysis into, key business results. If you're a software company, you're looking at revenue and bookings and growth, for instance, and that can also come into this typical month-end step process. So if we thought and looked at this and said, you know what, this looks like something ideal. Gee, I wish we could follow that routinely. It would make my life better. I'd sleep better. Then the question becomes, what's really important here? And one of the things that's just critical is the reconciliation process. And if it's not done monthly, we're going to say, let's try to do it quarterly for sure. And, reconciliations, a few key points here. Number one, it's probably, redundant to say this, but it's a fact of life in GP. It's a fact of life in any accounting system. I'm going to show you in a minute how GP can help automate this, but you still have to go through key account reconciliations. You can make your life easier in GP by establishing control accounts. This one ceases to amaze me. It is unbelievable how many clients out there in the GP space don't know about this feature. And a control account means that subledgers post to them. And what we want to do is we want to turn off the ability for any employee or anybody in finance, any accountant, to post a journal entry to a control account. In other words, we want to say, let the subledger feed the control account. And I'm going to show you how you do that in GP. It is the simplest little thing in the world, and we'll get there in just a second. But suffice to say, if you want to make your reconciliations easier, establish control accounts for these key modules: banks, AR, AP, inventory, fixed assets, WIP, deferred revenue, maybe, the list goes on. And lastly, of course, you probably all do this for preparation for audit at year end anyways, but keep that Excel workbook up to date. I always found it useful just to have a tab for each of the balance sheet accounts. It's easy to copy forward to the next month, and just a great resource to have in the background. At times, and even internally at our own organization when we do these, we even cut and paste screenshots out of GP and place them into that reconciliation workbook so everybody can see what we were looking at when we said it was reconciled. So how do we smooth out the month-end process? Well, first of all, let's create a month-end plan, one that specifies what needs to be posted and by who, and specify cutoff dates. And you can enter this plan in GP, and I'm going to show you that under Administration Routines, and you can create a checklist, or you could just put it in as a task on the homepage. Another one is schedule recurring financial review meetings with managers. And I put this in here because I know in those organizations that have pre-scheduled financial review meetings, it forces the discipline on month end. And if you don't have those, it can sort of let month end doesn't really have a big milestone, right? It doesn't really matter, so to speak, if no one's asking you to see the numbers. So if you establish financial review meetings, it's going to force the month-end close process to get done. Create a user self-service reporting plan. Now, this is a big one for me. Management Reporter has great capability to allow you to publish and share reports with your external reporting stakeholders, and they can simply click on a link and see the report. Those reports can be put on a schedule. So we absolutely recommend using Management Reporter to the fullest extent you can. Put those reports out there, and instead of finance taking it and saving it to Excel and massaging it and then sending it out through email, let's get out of that game and let's really try to establish an environment of self-service here. Do a hard close at least every quarter. I said that before. Get into detailed reconciliations on all the accounts by balance sheet. You're going to make your life so much easier at the end of the year when you get ready for audit prep. And lastly, and most importantly, in the balance of this presentation, let's use GP functions to automate month end. So specifically, I want to talk about GP and how I'm just going to go through the balance sheet and talk about some of the features that we have in here, and then I'm going to show you some of these. So I think everybody probably knows that BankRec is included in the system. Use BankRec. It's simple and easy to use. You don't have to wait till the end of the month to use it. You can update it during the month as you need to. And importantly, there is now an electronic reconcile function in BankRec, and that allows you to take a download from your bank of transactions, map the file, upload the file into GP, and it auto clears outstanding checks. If it can match deposits, it'll do that too. Strongly recommend BankRec, and take a look at electronic reconcile. When we look at AR, it's important to run the historical age trial balance and make sure you include the multi-currency information if you're in a multi-currency environment. You're going to want to check those balances, those multi-currency balances with the currency summary inquiry window in financials. I'm going to show you that. And of course, GP has a GL to AR Reconcile tool. And again, encourage that just to ensure that the subledger and the GL are in sync. And of course, if you use the control accounts, it's going to make this much easier. For prepaids, did you know that you can future post transactions in GP? So if you open up future periods and you had a prepaid, let's say it was an insurance policy that was $12,000, you could actually future post $1,000 a month for the next 12 months. And there's a feature in GP called revenue and expense deferrals. I want to show you that because it's especially useful for this function. For inventory, inventory is a different one for those of you that have it. First of all, we strongly encourage more than, regular counts, stock cycle counts. But for sure, when you run inventory at the end of the month, the key report there to run to back up your inventory balance is the historical stock status report. And of course, again here, run the GL to inventory reconciliation routine that's available in the financial routines area. For fixed assets, first of all, great module. If you haven't seen the Controller's Corner webinar on that, my colleague Lonnie did the last one on it. It's a fantastic module in GP. It's easy to set up, and it's going to save you so much time. First of all, it's going to give you continuity schedules. It's going to track net book value by asset. The beautiful thing is at the end of the month, you press a button to push depreciation through to the GL. We recommend here making sure that you use clearing accounts with fixed assets so that at month end, if there's a balance in the clearing account, it hasn't been set up in the module, you got to go in there and set it up. And at the end of the month, the other thing that's nice is you can run a projection against fixed assets depreciation. So it'll tell you, hey, how much is my depreciation going to be? And you can run that projection report before you actually push the depreciation through to the GL. So strong module there. So in assets, as you can see, if you were using all of these functions, all of a sudden a bunch of your reconciliations that we're doing are no longer in Excel templates. They're actually in the system, and we've got supporting reports to make it easier. When we look at liabilities, liabilities is bad. That's a good idea. Here we go with AP. With AP, same thing as AR. Run the historical aged trial balance, check the currency summary window if you're in a multi-currency environment, run the GL AP reconciliation routine. For accrued liabilities, you're here, you probably have to book any monthly adjusting entries. And in the accrued liabilities, you want to run the PO report that shows you received but not invoiced. And this will make sure that any POs that you've received but have not been invoiced, those are natively going to be accrued liabilities, and you can run a report to tell you the breakdown of that balance. For deferred revenue, again, one of my favorite features in GP is some of the deferred revenue capability that's there, whether it's revenue and expense deferrals, or you're using contract administration, or you're using project accounting. There's 3 ways in GP to defer revenue at source and have GP to take care of the runoff schedules and deferred. So we always look at those 3: revenue and expense deferrals, project accounting, and contract administration, depending on the need. And you can validate all these revenue deferral entries that are future posted, by the way, by the system by running, a report and management reporter or a smart list. And then once we're through those assets and liabilities, the final step for us is always, and I'm going to spend some time on multi-currency, is to run the multi-currency reval process. So if you're in a multi-currency environment, this tool allows you to reval. Typically what we do is reval monetary assets and liabilities. This is a button you press, and it calculates your unrealized gain or loss as a result of spot rate versus average rate at the end of the month. Then we say we want to make sure the fiscal period calendar is closed, and we run our management reporter reports. So, those key sort of functions in GP can really make life easier. Now, I want to take a look at some of them, just spend a bit of time on them in the system. So let me navigate here over to Dynamics GP. We're going to go ahead and just look at these. So let's start with understanding. I mentioned a checklist, and one of the things you can do in GP to set up a month-end checklist, if you navigate to administration and you look at routines, under the company here, you'll see checklist. And very simply, I went in there, I have a frequency of month end, and I created a month end checklist. So I said here, post all open batches. Well, if I click open on that, it takes me right to a series posting window that allows me to go through and post the open batches. For instance, we say, reconcile the checkbooks. Again, if I click open, it's going to take me right to the Reconcile Checkbooks feature. And what this is actually doing is it's logging the date and time that you went through and pressed that button. Reconcile the GL, another one. I click open, and it takes me right to the Reconcile the GL window. So I would encourage you, take the time and build out your month-end checklist in here. The other feature that's available that you could think about doing for a checklist, and I might do both actually here, is under tasks, right, on the home page. If you click on new tasks, you can come in and create tasks. So, for instance, I've got reconcile the bank statement as a task I created. I came in and created this task. I put a due date on it. I assigned it to someone. I linked it to the Reconcile bank statement window. It's so easy to get there. You just click on it, and you've got your functions right there. And then I set up a recurrence and said, hey, let's create this task monthly. And this is great because on the 5th day of the month, on that home page, it's going to put a Reconcile bank statements task on the system administrator homepage. So, you almost think about this. You could do one or the other. They're both good options and a really good way in the system to say, what are the month-end tasks and keep track of it. Next, I want to talk about the importance of control accounts. I mentioned this, control accounts. For whatever reason, a lot of organizations don't do this. Here's how control accounts work. I'm going to go ahead and open up my accounts receivable account. So this is a base AR account in Africa, 0001200. To make this a control account, all I do is deselect that check mark called Allow Account Entry. By deselecting the Allow Account Entry check mark, it means no one can manually charge a journal entry to that account. In fact, it means the only way to get a transaction into that account is that you have to have it set up as a default posting account. So if we go to Tools and we go into Setup and then we go to Posting and Posting Accounts, you want to make sure, for instance, in Sales, there's accounts receivable. So any transaction coming from the sales subledger that automatically defaults to this AR account will go through to the control account. The control account without Allow Account Entry selected means the only way a transaction gets into there is that it's set up as a default in the underlying modules. And again, I strongly encourage you to do this because it's going to ensure that the subledger forces the transactions and people can't manipulate that with journal entries. Okay? So let's remember that one, critically important. We mentioned bank rec before, and you guys all know about bank rec. I'll just mention here, if you go to the bank rec window and into financial routines, you'll see now there's an electronic reconcile menu. And of course, you've got the capability to set up downloads, and it'll tell you the last time you download, and it keeps track of some interesting statistics here, and really map a file and download it. And then when you open your bank rec, you're going to see that it's auto-cleared a bunch of the transactions. So absolutely encourage you to take a look at that. When we look at accounts receivable, I'm probably going to repeat this one in different places, but one of the things that's extremely important in multi-currency environment is this window under inquiry called Financial Inquiry Currency Summary. Here's what I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you AR. Okay, check AR, and for a specific period, I'm going to go back to, in this sample company, 2016, period 6. And I'm going to show you period balances. So what I'm seeing on this window is a breakdown of the different currencies that were posted into accounts receivable. It actually says, this is a US dollar functional company, by the way, but it says, we got $26,000 of outstanding Canadian dollars in AR. We've got New Zealand dollars, and what is that, 5370, and they were translated at point of entry to US. So the total balance in the GL account is $1,832,877. In that AR account, the majority of it, $1,790,957, went in US dollars. If you understand this, then I'm going to tell you this is step one to making sure multi-currency is working correctly. Step two at month end is you do this. You keep that window open, and you go over to sales, and we're going to go into reports, and we're going to go to our trial balance. And in our trial balance, we're going to run our historical age trial balance, okay? And in this historical age trial balance, I'm going to put it on the same date. I'm going to make sure multi-currency information is included. And in this weird window, to include something, you actually make sure there's not a check mark on it. I've actually never understood why this is the case, why they didn't make this include and put the check marks. They made it exclude and put the check marks. But anyways, now that we've said that, you'll all understand it. So let's go ahead and run this thing. And when you run it, I'll run it here to the screen. We'll give it a second to generate. Once this generates, what we're going to see is AR pops out. If I close the first AR account, report, when I have multi-currency included, it creates the second report. So you actually see the breakdown here of the currencies sitting in AR. This is what tells us, okay, this is what tells us here, if we compare that to, let's go back to here, this is what we want to do in month end. We want to make sure the numbers match. In the GL, we have $34,000 worth of Canadian. That's what we have in the AR subledger. It was 26,000 Canadian converted to 34. We have New Zealand dollars that were converted, and we have, of course, the US dollars coming to the total GL balance that ties. So you might want to, as part of your month end, just take a screenshot of these two, just like I have it on the screen, and you put it in AR. Now you know AR reconciles to the GL. If you want a second check on AR's reconciliation to the GL, what you would do, of course, is you would come back to financial. And in financial, there's another capability here under routines called Reconcile to GL. And this is where it allows you to reconcile the general ledger to payables, receivables, inventory, or bank. So I'll go to receivables. We create an output file. We create a cutoff date, and we click process. And what this reconcile to GL feature does, you know, very quickly, I'll see if I can expand that here a bit. Looks like I can't. Okay. It matches transactions that are, shows you transactions that are unmatched, potentially matched, and matched. And it shows you what went through receivables and what went through GL. And there we go, that's better. And at the bottom of it, you'll get a full reconciliation between the two. So if everything's in sync, there should be no difference. I'm using demo data here so it doesn't tie out. But again, this is fantastic. If you do those steps, I'm telling you, do that month by month, AR will always work perfectly. For those folks that are using multi-currency and don't understand it or can't understand what it's doing, that financial currency summary window is your key to life. It is absolutely what you need to look at. Another piece we like to talk about is revenue deferrals. And just quickly, let me show you something about how revenue deferrals could actually work for you. If I go in here to sales transaction entry, I'm going to put an invoice in very quickly to one of our customers here, and we'll do this one through the advanced paper company. Sorry, double click that. We'll scroll through real quick, and I'm going to put in, I'm creating a support invoice. So I'm creating a support invoice for $12,000. Now watch this. This is what's fantastic. If I go to distributions and I click on that $12,000 in support that's going to deferred revenue, and I go to additional, I can actually set up a deferral profile to go along with it that's going to future post $1,000 a month in deferred revenue starting in this case, April 12, 2017, and post it forward for 12 periods. That deferral schedule is tied to the transaction. It's future posted. I don't need to keep it in an Excel subledger. And as I mentioned before in GP, we've got revenue deferrals here in the revenue deferral module. We've got contracts admin. We've got project accounting. They all do revenue deferrals, and certainly happy to talk to you about how those functions work. So this is one area where revenue deferrals could work. Another thing we could think about is prepaids. And with prepaids, and we'll go back to our financial transactions, we also have financial deferral entries. So you can actually create a GL deferral entry that future posts entries. So in my case where I mentioned I have a prepaid insurance, it's a $12,000 policy. I could actually come in here and say, okay, I want to recognize insurance expense from prepaid insurance for 12 periods, and I'll put the amount in of 12 grand, and it's going to future post $1,000 a month. So this is another great way to just future post those entries and get the prepaids out if you know the schedule. A good feature to think about and take advantage of. In inventory, I mentioned for you, run the stock status report. It'll show you the value of inventory on hand. Use Reconcile to the GL to make sure your inventory, subledger, and GL are intact. For fixed assets, extremely important to know that in fixed assets, look, you can have one button at the end of the month. Simply do this, set a date, and click depreciate. And it's going to update all your assets and give you your depreciation expense. Nothing gets better than that in terms of month end. It also means that the module for fixed assets will give you your fixed asset continuity schedule, which I'm sure all of your auditors will ask for. In accounts payable, it's the reverse of accounts receivable. Run that currency summary inquiry window and run the historical age trial balance for accounts payable. For accrued liabilities, you know, GP's invested a lot of time here in purchasing. And, you know, now there's purchase requisitions and purchase orders, and you know, they have workflow included that people can approve a purchase rec by email, they can approve a purchase order by email, and then that becomes a vendor invoice, and then you do a receipt. And one of the advantages of using purchase orders is that the purchase order will actually auto-create an accrued liability. And basically how this works is at the end of the cycle, if you've received an item that was on a purchase order, it's basically going to debit the expense it goes to and credit accrued liabilities. And when the vendor invoice comes in and gets matched to the receipt, it's going to take the amount out of accrued liabilities and put it through to AP. So if you think about it, at the end of the month, if you've received goods, but you have not received the vendor invoice, the system has automatically accrued the liability for you. Run this report, and it'll tell you what we've got of what has gone through that's been received but not invoiced. In other words, what makes up the automated accrued liability. And you'll get this report, and it'll show you the POs and the receipts that we're receiving. You go right to the bottom of it. You'll see in this case we'd have $86,000 worth of accrued liabilities, automatically accrued by GP by using the purchase order system and enforcing receipts. So just a great way to automate that part. Deferred revenue, we mentioned. One of the quick things I'll mention about using the deferral profiles in GP in the deferred revenue area, when you save a deferred revenue transaction, I'll go to account transactions here because I created one for this. It saves the transactions as ALTRNs natively. So if you run a smart list with an originating transaction source of ALTRN, you'll actually see all of those future posted deferred revenue transactions. And of course, you can go look at those and double click on it to take you back to see, you know, what makes it up and where it came from. So again, just an important part there when we're thinking about deferred revenue on the balance sheet. And lastly, the only main one I wanted to talk about here, I got about 2 minutes left. One, just foreign exchange is the last step. And again, when I go to foreign exchange, it's really important that we understand two steps here. This financial inquiry currency summary window is key. So in here, I'll show you a different example here. I've got an investment example. We're going to show you how you run reval on it. When I go look at this one, we'll go 2017, period 4. I want to see the balance that's there. I got a period balance in this account. I got a $500,000 Canadian investment. It was put in the month when the exchange rate was 1.31. So at point of entry, it got translated to 655,000 US dollars. Okay. Now, what is happening here is we look at this window and we say, you know, because that's a monetary asset, we want to run a multi-currency reval on it. So once we've looked at that, we would go to our routine, and to me, this is the last step you do during month end in a multi-currency environment. You have a revaluation button. You can set up a revaluation routine to tell it, you know, what accounts to use and what rate table to use. And the beauty of this is just like fixed assets, you can run a projection report before you post it. So when I say print report only here, and I click reval, what it will do is push a report to the screen that's going to show me how the system is calculating the unrealized gain and loss. And basically what it says is there's my 500K, it went through at 1.31, but the spot rate at the end of the month was 1.32, so it's calculated an unrealized gain of $5,000. So you can imagine when you run that through all your monetary asset and liability accounts, it's just a fantastic way to push through your reval entries and to keep that balance sheet up to date based on the spot rate at the end of the month. Do that as the last step for transaction entry, and then of course once all the transactions are closed, we're going to go back to tools, setup. In setup we're going to go to company. In company we're going to go to fiscal periods, and we're going to close these out accordingly. So that is very quickly in a nutshell our month-end best practices routines. And at this point, what I will do is just take a quick look to see what questions may have come in. And I appreciate everybody joining today. Thank you. All right, the key question came up from somebody in a multi-currency environment. John, we can't get our multi-currency in sync. When we do our currency inquiry summary window transaction and look at the balances, they never tie out to AR. What do you suggest to fix that? Right, so we can run into, so that's a very good question. You can spend an enormous amount of time trying to reconcile that, or what you can do is that, for instance, you can go back to the source. So for AR, you run your AR historical age trial balance, and you run it with multi-currency, and you say, those are the balances in the currency accounts. And basically then what you do is you book journal entries to force the GL account to have those currencies. And one of the tricks to do that, to get it back into balance, might be, say, you pick a Saturday, and you set the exchange rate between Canadian, US, and other currencies you're using as 1. And then basically you take, if you had to remove Canadian dollars and up the US dollar portion to make it sync, take the Canadian dollars out, put the US dollar up, get that GL balance back in sync, and then run reval following that. And certainly that's something that's a little more complex, but I'd be happy to talk to you offline about that if that came up. Another question is, you mentioned in deferred revenue that there's 3 possible ways to book deferred revenue. Can you explain just a little bit more? Yes. So for deferred revenue, you can go from simple to more complex. The simplest deferred revenue function in GP is revenue and expense deferrals. If you're in a contract business where you issue invoices in advance and they're recurring invoices, and say you issue them in advance and you know, you defer them after the invoice is issued and you recognize revenue after that, I'd encourage you to take a look at contracts administration, because it has a function that allows us to keep track of the invoices but also keep track of the deferred revenue. And finally, if you're into the project world, project accounting natively has built in some deferred revenue tracking capability. And if you're in that area, you'd know about it and how you could use that as well. Those are the 3 options. I think there's no other questions right now, so I guess we can cut it off at this point. I thank everyone for your time. Look out for those professional hours certificates, and certainly stay tuned, because we have more sessions coming up in Controller's Corner. You can take a look at our webpage to learn about what those are. And I'll also remind everybody, we've been in this business for a long time. We have some great third-party products that help GP and the administration of GP, such as Changer, lets you merge and change GL accounts, Reformatter, you know, if you want to change the segment structure, analytical accounting tools to clean up AA if you're using it. We've got a company combiner tool that allows us to merge multiple GP companies together. And of course, we've got our award-winning talent management product, MPerform. So lots of information available on our website, and free trials available as well. Thanks for your time today, folks. Have a great day. Bye-bye.